Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week, we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode. I was texting with an old teammate who we could probably cover lots of things about our relationship because early on we just did not get along. But I was always like the rule follower, trying to like be in good with coach, and she just didn't care about those things. But I know I've mentioned to you before about an incident in mid-game. Do they still go back to the locker room after game 2?
Sometimes.
Oh, it's like the teams decided they want to do that?
Depends on whether they have a little longer intermission or not. But
no, like
yeah,
it's on TV. That's still
seen
a thing
it
sometimes.
done both ways, yeah.
So we went back to the locker room post game 2, and I guess we were not playing well because our coach is like laying into everybody, and she looks at the team and she's like, "You've seen my house, you've seen my cars. I don't need this job." And like everyone, and that's something I've told you that story before. So I'm texting with this teammate recently, and I don't remember how it came up. Oh, I asked her if she was going to go to the alumni game, but she brought up that same exact example. She's like, that was the moment that I was just like done as far as trying to work on respecting one another. She's like, I never felt respected. And then when she drops that, like, I lose all respect for you in that scenario as well. And it just occurred to me that the thought around, because her other example to that was she came from junior college, and she was like, my old coach, wasn't the world's best coach, but she respected us and we respected her. And so it worked out well because we, respected one another and what our roles were. And I think that's, as I mentioned to you, just something that is so crucial to have. And I think in the text I sent you, I said the respect that's required, but also that's like commanded from both sides, player and coach. But I think there's a difference between like demanding respect and commanding respect, maybe. Like, I guess the commanding to me is more action based. Like, you do things and therefore people respect you because of who you are and how you act and how you treat them.
Without just requiring it,
exactly.
Asking for
yes.
it. Okay.
Yes, and so I think the actions and words are really what are going to end up earning that respect from the coaches, from the player, on both sides. Like, it's a two-way street. I think a lot of people think that respect is just like I think it has to be mutual respect for one another in order for success to exist.
Yeah, I can't argue with that at all. I think, there is some kind of a positional respect that a coach or boss or
Absolutely.
manager has that kind of comes with the territory. But that's not enough to create a healthy culture and a meaningful experience for
Totally.
anyone involved. So I remember hearing Simon Sinek talk about business, and he said every business is a people business because every one of them has people involved.
Right.
And I think coaching is that for certain. When I got into coaching, I didn't really have any kind of well-formed view of why I wanted to do it. So I did a lot of studying on the matter before having to actually be coaching a team. Once I knew I was going to be coaching one. And I don't know, I was fortunate that kind of an innate part of my approach involved enjoying being with kids and seeing them learn and grow in a competitive environment. But I don't know, I didn't, especially when I started coaching volleyball, I freaking knew nothing, never seen a game. And I had kind of a complex, like, no one's going to, why would anyone care what I have to say about any of this, But I realized fairly early on, like, one of my strengths or whatever was I was just a regular person. Like, I wasn't playing head games or ego tripping, or I wasn't completely insecure. I was definitely insecure on the inside as a coach, not knowing what the heck I'm doing, but I don't know, not as a person per se. And so I didn't do things. I was volatile. That could have sunk me for sure. But for whatever reason, the kids knew that I cared about them, liked them, and I liked, being involved with them and their team and in that setting, and so that just kind of helped me. And I know, I mean, some people I still know from those early teams. That wouldn't be the case if they didn't know that I cared about them as people. I mean, I think you have to do that for there to be kind of this mutual respect that you're talking about.
Yeah, I feel like there's probably 100 different ways to initiate that respect, but what you mentioned just now of sort of being in that same environment together and recognizing that while you're maybe not equals from the title perspective, you're both existing, you're coexisting in this environment where you have common goals, you've got the same, pressures and stresses and things coming from expectations of fans or the athletic department or whomever. And I always think that, and maybe just because I was a little bit more mature for my age, but I always kind of became like friends with my coach, and not intentionally to like get an edge, but I did always feel like that gave me an advantage, that I could have a non-volleyball conversation with someone who was an adult and build some trust that way, which then bled over into the trust on the court or during the game. And it's funny because at the time, as I said, I was always coach's pet probably was the most disgusting way to describe it. But it was never, and that's what drove me nuts about it, was I never did it because I felt the need to like get the attention. If I find someone that I click with, whether it's my coach or a friend or a teacher, like I had a teacher from grad school that I became very friendly with, and everyone was like, "What gives?" And I was like, "I don't know, we just get along." Like it didn't matter that she was 30 years older. But again, I felt like that was one of those, and that was, I don't know if that specific one was one where it was intentional on the coach's part to like build that relationship, but whether it was intentional or not, it did, and it helped build confidence. If there was an issue with the team, she would always ask me to come in and talk at their office, like with ideas how to solve these problems. And I felt like that was really something where, because we had built a general dialogue, conversation, trust in one another for things outside, that when it came to those things inside where our world did definitely collide more, there's just a mutual understanding that we have common goals, common thoughts around things, and so our opinions were equally contributed at that point. And as I'm talking through it, I have to imagine too that the people who didn't like that or called me coach's pet, or no one ever called me that to my face, but I assume that's what the perspective was on that. They didn't make those efforts to do things. They didn't have those relationships because their focus was on themselves rather than the group. So I feel like that's where it's definitely a two-sided thing. It takes effort from coaches and players, or whatever environment you're in, whether it's a working environment or a sports environment, to recognize that yes, there is going to be this superior kind of in a player and coach. Yes, they are your superior. You need to respect them because they are in the position that they're in. But I think it's really important that coaches not use that relationship to their advantage to make players feel small and like I'm in control of you because I am in charge. I think that's where, and I think you mentioning you're volatile sometimes. I think I probably played on the back end of your getting your volatility under control. It was not constant. I knew it existed, but it wasn't like your coaching style. But even when you did like have an outburst, like my mom remembers one that I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like she's like, he just laid into you. I have no recollection. Apparently it was at Chapel Hill.
I do remember that one.
Okay. Like, I don't remember that specific event. Or if I do, it doesn't define the 4 years that I played for you, because I knew that I could come into your office midday if I was, had some time off from class, or if I wanted to just talk about my life. And you didn't just sit there and be like, yeah. Like we had meaningful conversations like the ones that we still have today that made it so that if you have it's like a parent-kid relationships, hopefully good ones. Like my daughter gets really worked up when I discipline her, get upset with her, and she's like, I just feel like you don't love me. But it's that like building of understanding that like it is my job to direct you and guide you and steer you, and sometimes that does feel like you're in trouble or like I'm mad at you, but I also need to make sure that you know that that's just the role. Like it is my job as your parent to let you know when you do something wrong and how to correct it so that it doesn't continue to happen. And I think in the coaching environment too, if you have that foundation relationship of trust and connection built, then in those heightened emotional moments, they're not defined by those heightened emotional moments.
Well, I always looked at it as you had to have a certain amount of credit built up.
Yeah, credit, yeah, exactly.
In order to, which trust is key there. So then if something happened, they weren't blown away by it, and it wasn't something that was just happening all the time.
Yes.
So I think that was pretty crucial. So then if I did have a moment where I thought, as I got older, those moments were much more calculated than reactive.
Yeah. Which is a very big difference.
Yeah. And the reactive ones are, you got to get a handle on those. But I remember I was coaching baseball, and a young man who was our first baseman, ball took a bad hop and a ball hit him in the face, and nose was bleeding, and so he wound up going to the hospital, going to the emergency room. And so when the game was over, I just went over to the hospital to check on him like a normal person. I didn't think anything about it. And then fast forward decades, I had, through Facebook, I had sent him a happy birthday thing or something, and I got a message back from him, and he talked about that,
I'll never
like
forget,
that.
yeah.
It showed that I really did care about him as a person and how much that meant to him. And his name's Jeff Kissel, good dude. And I was taken aback a little bit about like, wow, how impactful.
'Cause to you, that seemed just like the right thing to do, but to him, it was a different experience, probably with the coach than he had received before,
Possibly,
or any type of
yeah,
superior position. It's just
I think if you are in any kind of leadership position, you have to really make sure that the people you're trying to lead know that you care about them as individuals genuinely, not just for show, or trying to be manipulative. And I don't understand why you would want to go into
to not do that.
coaching. Yeah, like it's, and I don't know why, if you had a choice, that you would choose to play for someone who, or work for someone who didn't take that approach. Now, sometimes you find out after the fact. You kind of assume that.
Right.
But I mean, I know so many of the really high quality coaches. I would say all the high quality coaches, like collegiate coaches or whatever, that I know. I mean, they have true open door policies.
Yeah.
They want their players to come in and talk to them. They want that relationship.
I think there are a lot of coaches, let's just stay in that arena. A lot of coaches don't realize how many different ways there are to either express care or lack of care for your players. Like, it's not just praising them when they do a good job or asking how their sick dog is. It's not just like, but even down to like, there was one preseason for us that it just came in, it was just like hell immediately. And I mean, looking back now, a lot of people were not prepared, so it was a bit of a punishment. But some of those punishments were like, I wasn't injured, but I was so sore. Like, one of them was if you had an error, you had to bunny hop up the concrete steps of the arena and back down for every error. So my
like
neck,
if you hit a ball out or
whatever the drill was, yes.
wow.
So we're already having 3 days. And one of those very early on is, let's just rip your calves apart. So all of us, I mean, I couldn't even get down the stairs in my townhouse to get to my car to go to the gym. I had to sit down and scoot. And then I was supposed to get to practice and start actually playing. So looking back on that, like, I'm not anti, physical drills for punishment. I'm not anti-punishment for errors or things. I think there are right ways to do that. But looking back on that now, like, that was a very, like, disrespectful kind of, I don't know if that's the right word, way to treat your players. Like, her point wasn't being made with what the outcome was in that punishment.
Yeah,
that didn't make me make less errors. That just made me make way more later on because I couldn't function properly.
well, and
Complete lack of care.
I think creating an environment where everyone's afraid to make a mistake, that's ill-advised.
100%.
Nobody is going to play better feeling that. Now, I think you should create an environment where you can simulate pressure,
Yes.
so that they are able to feel a bit more comfortable in when it's pressure in a game or performance of some kind. And I think training needs to be hard, because that's how you get tougher. I'm a big believer in the you have to be tough enough to win kind of thing. When it really gets mean, and both teams are really competing with everything they have. But
Yeah, there's a difference between like training grit and
oh yeah,
just
yeah.
purely
Well,
punishing
I
with
mean,
no solution on the back end for that error in the first place.
I grew up a long time ago when coaches would happily. I mean, I
Use you.
remember playing football. I mean, I wasn't even old. It was like ninth grade or something, and I was coming off a broken tailbone. My coach was mad at me for something, so he made me end practice by doing sit-ups on my tailbone.
Right.
And that's I didn't feel respected or cared for.
Right.
I will say I.
Yeah. And whether you realize like that specific thing or like subconsciously just like this feels wrong, like that was very
I was
crystal clear that was
I
not okay.
hated him.
Yeah.
But I think these days with more entertainment options or whatever, and parenting, leadership, coaching, whatever you want to call it, it's different.
Yeah.
And plenty of it is for the good. Maybe some of it could be tweaked a little bit. But I think everybody is in agreement that we need to work together in pursuit of goals or common cause or purpose or whatever. But I think even if it's in a work environment, employees need to be aware of the impact their actions have on the people they're working with.
Correct.
Or for,
Yeah.
Their bosses or superiors or whatever. Because they're facing certain pressures that they may not have to deal with as much. But everybody's facing some kind of pressure and demands. And I think being aware of that and then creating a culture where there is mutual care.
Yes. I think that's one of the better, like just caring for one another is probably maybe the highest form of respect in my mind, of just like people who just give a damn. Like I've had basically two jobs in my career. And the first one, where technically I had unlimited vacation, I was pretty much hired at will. Like it was a kind of sales role. So every time I took a day off, there was some sort of comment from my business partner about when you're coming back, or like, weren't you just out, or like just always. And it was supposed to be funny, but it just was never funny because I always felt like I couldn't just enjoy my time off. And where I am now, I think I might have taken a screenshot of this on our team's group chat. My boss sent out a message to everyone on like a Friday afternoon and was like, I can see a bunch of you have built up vacation days. Don't forget to take those days, even if you aren't going somewhere, just take a day off, because that's time that the firm owes you. Like, that is your time. And I replied immediately. I was like, I'm going to file that and things no boss has ever said to me before. But just those little things where she, like, if I say, I'm off tomorrow, but yeah, I'll join that call at 11. She's like, no, leave your laptop at home. Like, don't join that call at 11. We can do it without you. She's very intentional about making you feel like your time is your time, which makes me want to work harder when I'm at work, because I'm not trying to squeeze in personal stuff in the middle. So just those two very contrasting examples are a way that I have a much different respect for her as my boss.
Yeah, I mean, I always think back to this 25 years ago, where one of my players had a birthday during the season, and she invited me to her birthday party, and I went. And
what kind of party was it?
Just at her parents' house.
Oh, like
it was not
pizza
a
and hang out and
bouncy house or whatever.
Princess
no,
themed.
Yeah. At the
even a bouncy house.
Never happened. But at the end of the year, the team, each player had 2 or 3 pages in the scrapbook where they would write something on the season. And this girl was a senior, and that's what she wrote about. And she said, I can still remember, I knew that you really cared about me when you came to my birthday party. And me deciding to go to that was just, yeah, sure.
Yeah. But it meant a lot
but
to
it
her.
meant to her,
Yeah.
a lot to her. And that it was a great reminder of the influence you wield
Yes.
in that position. Because player coach, players have this almost automatic or innate trust, belief in that whoever's in that position. And you have to honor that and not betray it.
Well, it's up to you to like maintain that and strengthen
Absolutely.
that. 'Cause if they're going to come in just acknowledging that this is my teacher, so they're higher than me, or this is my coach, so they have an authoritative position, it's up to that person in that higher position to, it's not just like, oh, well, this is just how it should be because I'm bigger than you and you're smaller.
Right.
You have to, and that's, I think, the big picture of this conversation is that there are things you have to do, intentional things you have to do. And like you said, I don't think that you went to her birthday party because you're like, oh, this is going to make an impact on her life and she's going to remember this when she's a senior. You just went.
Right.
But in making choices, like being intentional about the things that you do for people, like you could have been like, oh, this is dumb, whatever, and just not gone. And she might have said, well, that's what I expected him to do. And that would have moved on and never had any impact on either one of you. But because you thought, well, okay, she invited me, so I'm going to go, just make that little bit of an effort. She remembered it years later. We're talking about it still today. And so I feel like when you act in a position that I care about one of my players, which are typically probably half your age, or maybe not at that point because you were pretty young when you started coaching, right? At that point, one of the things I was thinking about is whether it's on Sports Center, which I don't even know what channel ESPN is anymore. Usually on my phone, we see clips of like post game when the coach runs in the locker room and all the kids jump and they're cheering and dancing together. Like, and lots of times those coaches are 50-something, 60-something years old, and these kids are teenagers. I don't think that you can celebrate in that fun, jumping around way if they don't also have ways to be somewhat equal. So where the coach brings himself down, like, and listens to the kids' dumb music, or vice versa. I think there are things that you have to do to be able to have that sort of fun-loving, celebratory relationship outside of just winning.
Yeah, and I mean, interestingly enough, that player wasn't a starter on that team, and so I think, yeah, it was always part of the message was that if you're on this team, you matter.
Everyone,
you have a role,
yes.
and your impact is genuine and real. So I think some of her response was couched in like me lending
Value.
real weight to that statement. It's easy to say, but a little trickier to back up sometimes. And I just think that it's easy to get fixated on the results to a fault.
Yeah.
But if you're sacrificing those connections with the people you're working with,
Expecting to succeed with.
then those results, you won't be able to consistently get what you're looking for.
Yeah. So it's that little, we always use the word excellence in everything we do, but like, while it the word excellent might seem too big for that act that you did for her, like that was one small choice that you made, one small choice that you put into sitting in your office having conversations with me when I was having a hard time in high school, and like doing all those little intentional things. Those are excellent acts of service to others or relationship building to others, that you can't just have a team of people and expect that we're going to have an excellent performance, and if we win our games or if we win the title, then we're excellent. Like all of those little things in between, aside from just the physical practice of the sport, the relationships require that intention and that excellence too.
Yeah, and it's easy from a coaching standpoint to let your ego run amok almost. I mean, I can remember a coach looking at me and saying, "I will never be outcoached during a match," and someone I was coaching with, and that was never the angle I came at this with. But I know coaches and they tend to overcoach.
Yeah.
They tend to view their players as chess pieces rather than having a better sense of the humanity,
Right.
their frailties, how things are going out there. I used to just kind of shake my head at coaches like that, but now I feel for them because they are like their worth and identity is wrapped up in these results, and they're very concerned with how they're perceived, and that
Probably end up limiting themselves on what they can actually.
well, that was
possibly
always
do.
the thing I thought, especially college coaches where, I mean, you have to have results or you're going to get
That's
fired.
the job, yeah.
But I always thought, wow, they behave in a way that almost guarantees they're not going to get the results they are seeking, which will then result in the thing they fear the most.
Yeah.
But that fear is real.
Yeah.
Like I have great empathy, and really now more than ever, coaches in the collegiate scene trying to manage all of the stresses involved. And I just finished reading this book, The Price by Armin Katayan, on college football and the changes that have taken place. It just came out this fall, so it's very current. And I mean, it is reading about these people's lives. It's just unbelievable, the stress that's involved. But you don't have to be coaching. College football was just, there's so much money in it the stress on everyone is enormous, whether it's administrators or coaches or players, or parents, anyone involved. But even in sports that have, less of the spotlight on them, the stresses and pressures are still real.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to kind of lose track of why you got into this in the first place and what you hope to accomplish just because you're trying to keep your job so you don't
Right.
have to move your family or take your kids out of school. And that's why I think it goes back to like really reflecting on what reasons you started doing this in the first place, what you hope to accomplish, who do you want to be on this journey. And I think that who you want to be thing, that needs to shine through to your players or your coworkers or whatever, students, because that's where the connections are made. And I think that's where you find real meaning and power. When coaches don't do that, I just think they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
And they're going to struggle. And I mean, I've known some coaches who let that stress really affect them. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't,
Sure.
if I was in those situations. But, when I'm detached from it and I can look at it, I'm like, wow, if they wouldn't do that and try to do this instead, they may get what they're looking
Right.
for instead of putting it at risk. But I think that's too where the human aspect of this has to be what drives it.
Yeah.
Because those relationships are what gives it all meaning, whether it's, if you're in business, I mean, the same thing can happen. Like if you have customers, there needs to be respect and empathy
Yeah.
for them and their needs. And if customers get the sense that you do care. I remember I was in Dunkin' Donuts with a guy I was having a meeting with, and we just went in to get coffee. No donuts, I promise. But it was busy and
Not
there was
like their coffee.
drive-through, but the guy who was at the cash register, he was probably not very experienced, but he gave off this vibe like he really cared.
Yeah.
He was trying his best, and he was doing a good job of still being very polite
Yeah.
but he was having a difficult time.
Sure.
And
But he was doing what he could to
he was
still
doing everything
deliver.
he could.
Yeah.
And me and the gentleman I was with, we were both struck by that, both, probably overly kind in response, but it brought out the best of us,
Yeah.
I would say. And then I was thinking the whole time, like, "Ugh, man, I could put me back there when I would be doing way worse of a job. And two, I
bringing
wouldn't
that.
be as good a person as he is.
Yeah.
So I think that whole respect and empathy thing, it just cuts both ways in every
Yeah.
possible relationship we have.
Yep.
And I think that is pretty foundational if you hope to have success or whatever, whatever you're doing.
Well, from a example you gave, when I think about like the idea of just customer service, like when you go to certain, well, it's called service for a reason. Like you can serve others, you can serve customers, whichever it is. But you go somewhere like this trip I'm going on for work next week is we stay at a very nice high-end hotel. And now I go there 6 times a year, but I don't go there 16 times a year, and I'm there for a business trip. And there are people that when I walk in, hey, Mrs. Benson, how you doing? Welcome back. We gave you that room you liked last, just those little, like, not just welcome back. And they're not looking at the screen saying, I see you stayed with us before. Welcome back. It's like they greet you at the door. They know roughly when we're arriving because they have it's all of those extra little things that in a service environment that's very important to the experience for the customer. Very similarly, the way that you serve your players or you serve your employees or you serve your friends and family or your children is going to create an experience for them that builds that comfort and that trust and that, like I appreciate staying there. I appreciate it because it's a nice place to be, but I appreciate the people that I'm around when I'm walking from room to room and going to the restaurant, to the bar. Like everyone is intentional with their eye contact, their smiles, it's just those little extra things that we think about in a service environment like that, where you are serving paying customers. Why are we not treating everybody like that? Like if that's the experience that people like and that people respond well to, Like, why is that not our everyday? Because it takes effort.
I think sometimes we get trapped in our own
Mm-hmm.
heads and wallow in our own
Yep.
struggles, and we forget to remember, I guess, that the way out of that is
Yeah.
by moving outside of ourselves, and that's where, like the book Unreasonable Hospitality. It's just one story after another of
Yep.
these people doing things that are small gestures,
Very small.
but
So meaningful.
and unforgettable.
Yep.
Things that people remember years later.
Yep.
And I remember reading this book, The Power of Bad, and we're talking about how this one hotel in New York City, they were kind of chronically rated low, and they hired someone to help them make their way out of that. And the consultant they hired, talked them into having these little ways to spread sunshine or whatever. And it's very similar to what you just said about the hotel you go to, like knowing ahead of time, why they're there.
Yeah.
And taking every opportunity to make those connections so you can learn more, so you can serve better and make them feel valued.
Yeah.
And whether it was the free cocktail hour.
Right. It can be very little.
Right.
When you can step outside of yourself and give to others, do for others, care for others, have empathy for others, consider others. Like consideration is something that I'm really like, rather than saying like you didn't care about, it's consideration of other people. And consideration is not being nice. It's just like literally considering that person, whether it's their feelings or their time or it's just that giving into other people and thinking, how can I help them? How can I relieve their stress? How can I make their day better?
Yeah. And I mean, I think all of this is connected. We're trying to create meaningful experiences for the people that we're with. And
for ourselves, like
yes,
giving to others creates an experience for you as well, because they respond to it. They're bonding with you, and in turn you're bonding back with them, and it heightens and enhances that relationship.
Yeah, I'm always kind of leery to make sure we don't. I think I have rabbit ears on this. It's my problem. I think if you just spend your time connecting with those other people, you don't have to be aware of the fact that you're going to be better off too.
Right. Right.
Because then it does kind of become transactional or whatever in a
More
not great
direction.
way. Right. And so, I mean, I think if we lose ourselves in trying to build and grow these relationships, whether it's at work or home or with our friends or teams we coach or play on, it just is how we are made to thrive. And from a performance standpoint, I even then, like I mean, from I'm competitive, want to win, but I think if we can lock in on making the most out of these moments truly, then those results will be what we are looking for. And that doesn't mean that we're not putting in place high standards and all of that kind of stuff. That I think we need to constantly be pushing those kinds of boundaries. But in a team or work environment, whatever it is, if everybody gets the sense that we're rowing in the same direction and that
It's a whole lot easier to have on board.
yeah, we feel valued.
Yeah.
And I mean, those are whatever these few things that we all really need. Mastery is one, but feeling valued is another.
Yeah.
And that's incumbent upon leadership to really consider all of that, very intentionally, and then bring in everyone and try to create that together. I know even in teams I coached where, they talked about what their goals were, which were quite lofty, and I knew what was going to be required to get them there. It was going to be painful at times, but I didn't just, all right, this is what you're going to do then. I got them to come in and buy into this, and here's why. Like you say, you want to accomplish these things. Well, that's you're asking a lot of yourselves, a lot of all of us. So then you have to be willing
Willing
to
to go,
pay
all
the
those
price
hours,
for
yeah.
that, and that's all about preparation. And
Yeah.
there are no plays off. There are no reps off in practice. Like, and I was just reading a article on T.J. Watt, who plays kind of outside linebacker for the Steelers, and that was probably the thing that every teammate kept going back to with him. Is his preparation, and he never takes a play off. He is always like full out, 100% effort, and that's why he's one of the
Successful.
great football players in the league. And I remember when he was drafted. He was drafted in the first round, but late, and no one really anticipated this kind of career from him.
Yeah.
And some people even second guessed the pick. Well, nobody's second guessing that pick now.
No.
I mean, he's a
Yeah.
certain future Hall of Famer, but I just thought it was interesting that the quality they kept going back to was every play, boom, 100%, 100%.
Well, that builds a confidence for him that is how he does this. There's no other way to do this task other than full throttle. And going back to that example in the beginning of, a physical punishment for errors, I remember one time, and I think I had a doctor's appointment, so I think I didn't have to do it. I was like, I was sure you're going to make me make it up, but I didn't have to. But the team ran suicides for what sounded like the majority of practice. I don't know. That didn't seem like your kind of thing, but for whatever reason, we did something bad enough that was the punishment that day. Otherwise, the punishment was always a correction, like do it again. And I think that, and we would get physically tired from having run the same thing over and over, so there was a physical aspect built into
Right.
it. But do it again is, I know you can do it, so do it again, versus a physical punishment with no, like, that builds fear of punishment and disapproval rather than do it again, which just inherently has this because I know you can behind it. And so in a game, when you make an error or the pressure's high, which athlete is going to perform better? The one who's used to punishment when errors exist, or support and encouragement that I know you can get through this when errors exist. And that to me is just a huge difference in I want to say it's a small change for coaches to do, but it's hugely impactful to not think of that as like there's not some list of things where it's like, punish this way, not that way. But having experienced both, the outcome for the do it again, encouraging punishment, if you will, is way better performance-wise than the you suck, go bunny hop up the stairs, because that was awful. Right? Like, that doesn't instill confidence from the coach in a high-pressure situation.
Yeah, and I think you have to be very careful about what you're quote-unquote punishing. I mean, if there's a lack of effort, lack of
yes.
engagement, then I think there need to be consequences for that. You have to figure out what those will be. There aren't unlimited hours in the week to practice, so you need to be
Maximize
judicious
time.
about making the most of that. I think you can do drills that are very taxing physically and
Absolutely.
mentally that involve the sport somehow,
Yeah.
rather than we're just going to run stairs for an hour. You don't have all those hours. But I'm not into punishing errors. I was when I first started. I quickly stopped doing that
Just
because
doesn't yield results.
I was like, this is not, we're going to be in great shape, but that's about it. We're
Right.
not going to be any better. But I've read, where somebody suggested punishing every mental mistake, and I tried that briefly.
That wasn't the ticket either.
No, it was just, I did it one day where I kept making them run, and I was very new into coaching, and just realized that same day, like, this is a terrible idea. I'm not doing this.
Right.
But I think creating situations and practices or any kind of training where the demands are clear, and you try to simulate as much as possible, like game pressures and things like that. I think those are real. And I think finding ways to train the game where it's like very physically demanding is important. But I don't think necessarily that means you have to just run sprints.
Physically abuse you.
Well, and it's one thing if, back in the old days, well, we're going to practice 4 hours.
Yeah.
That's not how it goes anymore. And so you just have to adapt, evolve. Plus, people aren't putting up with that. Like,
Right.
whereas there may have been some unquestioned willingness to like, all right, we'll do whatever he says. Like, I mean, I remember reading about the Texas A&M football team that Bear Bryant coached back in the 50s, and they would go out in the middle of the freaking desert and train. He wouldn't let them have any water. And well, one, there was no 300-pound football players back then. A 210-pound player was a big guy.
Yeah.
But two, nobody's putting up with that.
No.
I mean, and really, no, that's not.
Right.
I don't advocate that approach at all. But he was trying to create a certain culture. He was trying to have it be very demanding, so that when push came to shove,
Right.
they were going to be tough enough to do whatever. And so I am. You have to develop
Building
toughness.
toughness, 100%.
You just
The way
have
to go
to.
about it.
Yeah, and you have to do it like in a way that's going to resonate with people
With those
today.
people. Yes.
And I think, I mean, I've talked to coaches who think you can't develop toughness. I disagree.
Yeah, same.
And I talk to them, but well, they'll say you can't develop even a competitive spirit. I also disagree with that. But I think you almost, I don't know, have to get their permission or buy-in. Like everybody's got to agree to this.
Yes.
And that goes back to like the first thing you were talking about with the respect and trust. I think when all of that is created, then it's much easier, much more possible, whatever, to have that group move forward together
Right.
in pursuit of these common goals.
Well, I know, especially in college or high school sports, when you got kids you're dealing with, everyone's going to respond to things differently. And sure, you can't punish one kid one way and one the other and encourage one the exact same way. However, I do think it's important to make sure that the team as a whole understands why this is the way we do things. And so, like the screen example you gave, the guy that puts the screen up,
Right.
and, you know,
Yep.
like that was fortunately something he as the player was able to do. But I also think it's some responsibility of the coach to learn about how each kid reacts. Like I was the player that could just get stomped all over, and they knew I wouldn't be like quitting the team the next day. I could just take it. Not that was okay, but that there is the people you can take things out on, the people that you can't. But one morning we had to get up early after a game because we were going to be punished for how we played, I guess. And they read they printed out the play-by-play and read every person's name, every error that someone like Caroline misserve, so-and-so. And we ran a basketball suicide for every single one of those. And by like the 27th one, I looked and I was like, we get it. Like, we get it. It's not fixing the issue. The loss is still on, right? Like it just, that was not fixing any of those errors. All it was breaking down those players who made the errors and making them feel completely worthless, to then next time at practice or a game feel like, oh my God, if I do like way to just increase the pressure on your
Right.
players and not let them play in a relaxed flow state and trust their skills and trust their teammates and trust the process in the game and the practice. Like, way to completely obliterate that confidence that, especially in a sport like volleyball when there's so many points to be scored, that's just such a
I mean, that's a wow example. Because I mean, ideally we want our players to play freely, and
yeah.
when we create that kind of tension where they know I'm liable to hear about this again on Monday and have to run for each one of these, like I don't think that's going to get the results you're looking for. I'm assuming it didn't pay off. But that goes back to like, why are you doing that as someone who's a coach? Like, is this going to help my team play better?
Right.
I'm
Or you're
guessing
taking out your anger, your rage on.
I'm guessing on some level she thought that it would. I don't know. I think that was probably not accurate. But that undermines trust
Yes.
and definitely confidence. I mean, confidence is always fragile regardless of
Yeah.
what it is you're doing. And so I think it's incumbent upon coaches, leaders, whatever, to create an environment that fosters belief and confidence as opposed to threatens identity and worth. And that is, I know I started watching Ted Lasso again, which I think this is like the fourth time I'm watching these shows. But it is a great show, and it takes someone who is a college football coach in America, drops him into a setting where he's coaching a professional soccer
team. Yeah.
team in England, and everybody thinks it's a joke, except him and the guy he's coaching with. They come over together, and it's not too terribly long before people realize that there are reasons why he was successful in America coaching
Character
it,
and leadership type
and
aspect,
connections and care for players, and it's a really good example of how we're supposed to be doing this
what's important.
and how we're going to get the results that we desire in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm going to manipulate these people or trick them into thinking I care about them or whatever. Like
Right.
that's
Actually doing it.
but yeah. And I mean, the best coaches I'm lucky enough to know, that was there.
Yeah.
And it was great to watch. I know one of my best friends, Dean Monroe, he was a high school basketball coach. He's just one of the best coaches I've ever seen at any level in anything. And he had all of these like really high standards, but really pure reasons for coaching, and a great ability to connect with everybody involved in those programs to create really unforgettable experiences on a consistent basis year to year. And it was great to be a part of, just to watch him do that.
Yeah.
And I had such admiration and appreciation and respect, and still do.
It's gone now, but
Yeah, right. Poof. And I mean, this has been a while ago where I was able to see that, because he doesn't coach basketball anymore. But he's still a great leader.
yeah.
And it's because, I mean, he might be even better at creating these connections and promoting these relationships with everybody that is in his circle. And I don't know, he's just, to me, he's a case study in excellence in leadership. And I learned so much over the years watching him and listening to him. And that's where, I don't know, we should all just be trying to pay attention and see how people who are really good at it are doing it, why they're doing it. Plenty to be learned. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.